Hello there. Today we are doing a tour of my Polearms Only account because recently we got to AR60. Got to AR60 on a live stream I did last week, and Chevreuse ruined the moment, so I'm not going to bother including the clip, particularly because I also forgot to record it because I'm an idiot. I think it's been almost 2 years, although not quite. First character we got was Rosaria. Rosaria joined on May 18th, 2022. Yep, so in May it will be 2 years, so, you know, a year and 10 months, close enough. I'm just going to go over all the character acquisition history, you know, and builds and teams and blah 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 they use on this account. Just a whole bunch of reflection of like the experience of playing on this account. The general way I'd summarize it, though, if you just want to leave the video right now because you hate my sound, that's I can't word. Polearms Only, I think, has been a story of like hyper investment into like a niche archetype, right? Like, generally speaking, many players hyper-invest, like, right? You might hyper-invest into just, like, you love Xiao so much, you might hyper-invest in trying to get C6 Xiao eventually. Polearms Only is more a story of hyper-investment into, you know, the polearm archetype. And that comes with a lot of problems when it comes to, you know, trying to clear the content of the game. Some of it being overworld related, but honestly, the overworld stuff is, like, the least of problems. It's just, like, a problem early on more than anything. But then, more notably, it has a lot of like endgame combat implications too in Spiral Abyss, but despite that, I have still been quite successful if you followed this series. I've had a streak 36 star in the Abyss for several months now, and I've been able to pretty consistently 36 star the Abyss since last year, for over a year straight. Rosaria was the first character we got on the very first episode of Polearms Only. And she is, oh, of course they don't show the constellations there. Ugh, okay, let's gotta do this the annoying way. Rosaria is C3. Like, sadly, of like the 4 stars we have in the account, the only one that is lower constellation than her is Thoma. And Thoma was, I think, the second or third polearm character we got, so it's kind of funny. Although it's even funnier, the fact that we have C1 Thoma. I think I got the first Thoma from Xiao's banner, and I have more Xiao constellations. So, you know. Anywho's already distracted. So yeah, Rosaria was the first character we got. I used Rosaria for a long time, just like on a physical build on the account, and she is actually still part of one of probably my favorite team actually that I use on Polearms Only, which is a Rosaria melt team on a Gilded Dreams build with Shenhe and Xiangling. Normally I use her on Staff of Scarlet Sands for that purpose, but you know, something like Jade Spear is not bad at all. She has a lot of weapon options as far as making her melt archetype work, which is pretty cool. And she's a strong character. By the way, have you noticed the artifact screen here? There's a whole lot of artifacts that are just, you know, unused. That's just kind of how this account be. By nature of, you know, limiting the characters you can use on the account, you just inevitably hyper invest and farm a lot for characters and wind up with a whole bunch of artifacts that are like, hey, these are useful artifacts, but you don't necessarily have as much characters to use them on, so a lot of them just sit unused forever. The character we got after Rosaria, I don't remember if it was Xiao or Thoma first. We got them in like the same banner. So we got Xiao and Thoma, and both of these characters I'd say have not been as useful. Xiao is on VV, and that's what his eternal use has been. He's also nice for Overworld, and notably, like, he's really useful for Mondstadt Overworld. As far as like completing the game goes, Xiao's a very important character for Polearms Only because there's a whole lot of, you know, animo pillar things and whatever in Overworld that you want, and that's quite nice. He has been useful for that purpose, and he has been useful for doing things like before Chevreuse came out, I used Xiao as a VV spoiler for Hu Tao. Is that a sad use case for Xiao? Yes, but at the same time, hey, it's a use for Xiao. That's something. The situation with Xiao on Polearms Only is just like a sad case of we don't have any of the typical supports that are kind of required to make Xiao in his intended, you know, plungy DPS playstyle feel good. So he just ends up being relegated to buffing duty because that's what Animo does kind of best. And we only recently got Xiao C1 and C2 in the process of trying to get C6 Yaoyao, which I do actually think was worthwhile. I didn't know it was for sure going to be worthwhile until I got it, and I think it was. Both these Xiaos were early. Actually, now that I think about it, all 3 Xiaos that I acquired on this account were early. So, and they were all 50-50 wins. Apparently Xiao loves me. I should have continued wishing for him and gotten C6, clearly. Anyhow, after Xiao, I think, was Zhongli. He had a banner. And that, I don't remember if we won the 50-50 or not. It doesn't really matter. He's a useful, very, very useful defensive unit. Go figure. He basically eternally stays on a fab build with 40k HP on tenacity. I have tried some, physical damage builds with Mika that are pretty fun. I do genuinely like that, but his main utility is just, as a keep my units alive and buff a little bit type of unit, which is how everyone uses Zhongli. Zhongli is no different on Polearms Only. I don't remember when I got Yunjin. Yunjin, I have her C6, and I don't know when I actually got her C6. I think she was one of the earlier C6s I got, and Yunjin is unironically, I think, a undervalued character in general, in my opinion. But on Polearms Only, notably, because of the lack of other buffers, the fact that she gives some kind of buff, like her normal attack damage buff, right? That is useful. So like she's useful, even like Hu Tao, for example. I could do a normal attack spamming playstyle, and hey, that gets bonus damage thanks to doing Yunjin and Zhongli Hu Tao together, right? Because on Polearms Only, one thing with Hu Tao, you can't really vape. Hu Tao cannot use Candace to vape because Hu Tao applies too much pyro. You're kind of stuck with trying to buff Hu Tao in other methods, like using Shao, like I was mentioning. But Yunjin is another option for that she ends up being surprisingly useful, both early game for just, nice physical damage in Overworld, and on even late game she has value, and there might even be a future character coming out that I think she will give even more value to with her normal attack buff. After Zhongli, I believe was Sino and Candace got released. And Sino, by the way, Sino's the last, it's been, when did we get Sino? September 27, 2022. It's been a long friggin' time since we had a new Polearm 5-star, to say the least. Look at all these characters that have released since Sino. Oh, good lord. Thankfully that'll be changing soon. But yeah, so Sino and Candace released together, and what's your guess? Is Candace a more important character, or is Sino a more important character? There is one correct answer, and sadly, despite the fact that I've had C2 Sino, the answer is 100% Candace. It's 1 billion% Candace. The fact of the matter is Hydra is a pretty important element, and Candace has a lot of nuance in how her kit works that she can actually apply, and she's a really useful character. She kind of requires C6, but she works a lot, and she's generally speaking always involved in my 36-star Abyss clears. Sino, sadly, is generally speaking not. Oh, I think I should talk about the status of this account. I did do battle passes and Welkins, so that's why I have, stuff like the R5 deathmatch here. I haven't bought them every single patch or anything. I haven't done Welkins every single patch, but I've always liked to try to keep a little bit of surplus of Prima Gems, just so I can, wish for things if I need to. And that's, I think, was a smart decision as far as being able to make content on this account. Ultimately, all that, doing that did, though, is just accelerate the progress of the account a bit. Blah, 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 blah. Point is, low spender is kind of the way to go in my experience with Genshin. If you want to be able to build a lot of characters consistently and, be able to acquire the things you want without having to stress out that much about, doing all the exploration in the game. You can see I've purposely ignored this area. We got Sino C2 because the one time that I decided to top up on this account was for Candace. I wanted C6 Candace after I used her for a little bit with C2. I was like, nah, I need C4, and then I ended up getting C6 because, that's how it goes. And we ended up getting C2 along the way of getting C6 Candace, and despite that helps Sino a lot, to be clear, on this account. But it doesn't help enough. He's sadly eclipsed. If I didn't get C3 Raiden, then I think Sino would have gained some new life with Chevreuse. But Raiden with Constellations is better than Sino with Constellations for this account, and honestly in general. So yeah, I did use him to 36-star with this Thundering Fury build with Chevreuse, and it worked pretty well. So yeah. Sino's not a useless character. He is, as a DPS unit, for his DPS playstyle, he's more useful than Shao. And now that Chevreuse exists, at the very least, Sino has Sino problems on this account, just like Sino has Sino problems on a normal account, without getting too in-depth in it. After we got Sino, Raiden had her first rerun. So we first acquired a C0 Raiden over a year ago. Raiden, for the longest time, was relegated to just Hyperloom duty. Because that's where she fit best in. Her hybrid playstyle with Staff of Scarlet Sands that I play with an EM Timepiece and EM Goblet is something that only really started to shine, I'd say, with her constellations in this account. Hybrid Raiden works without constellations on a normal account, but because I don't have, the optimal teammates to pair with Raiden to make her shine, then, it kind of required constellations. And then also Chevreuse breathed a whole ton of life. Chevreuse was the real changer, honestly, for Raiden more than anything. I think with Chevreuse, I would be more than happy with, a Caesar or Raiden still on a traditional emblem build. After Raiden, though, was, I believe, Hu Tao. And Hu Tao, when I first got her, was kind of a situation of, everyone only talks about Hu Tao in the context of, like, her being able to vape. And I think I mentioned before, like, Candace is not enough to vape with her, because Candace, the way you get enough Hydra application out of Candace is, generally speaking, by using her infusion Hydra application. And Hu Tao's infusion can't, she's doing pyro on her infusion, so she can't do Hydra application with her normal attacks. And she applies so much pyro when she's doing her charge attacks that without Xingqiu, Yelan, without a bunch of Hydra options, you can't saturate Hydra on an enemy to be able to vape consistently with Hu Tao on this account. And therefore, I thought Hu Tao was not going to be that useful. But it turns out, she was. She's one of the most important characters in this account as far as damage goes. And the reason is because she's really good at buffing herself. You see her attack stat, she has 1800 attack. Just by nature of using her skill, right, she goes up to 4000 attack. This means she's not reliant on characters like Bennett to be able to have a high attack stat. By the way, I totally forgot to talk about Xiangling. Xiangling is Xiangling, and she's really important for this account for a whole lot of teams. I'm just going to leave it at that. It's the same thing as any account. C4 makes a notable difference. Xiangling, I can tell you, does not need Bennett. I do have her on Engulfing Lightning for the purpose of having a whole whack ton of ER on her. And yeah, this is a ridiculously strong Xiangling build, by the way. If I recall, I don't really care that much about Akasha rankings, but last time I checked, it was a top 1% build on Akasha. So yeah, a decent Xiangling build. But anyways, all the pyro polearms. Hu Tao's very good at self-enabling herself to deal damage that is competent, especially in context of, normally I've only recently started using Martial Say Hunters on her, which is because of Chevreuse. For the longest time, I was using 4-piece Shimenawas on her, and I have a very, very good 4-piece Shimenawas build for Hu Tao. Yeah, her mono pyro damage when you just, use Xiao to like swirl and then, have Zhongli and have Yunjin or have Xiangling on the team just have more like AoE pyro damage has been able to carry through a lot of abysses, mostly just because it's strong enough single target damage that in conjunction with having Staff of Homo, which definitely helps, and then I was able to get C1 as well for being hyper invested, because again, this account is this account is a story of hyper investment. Like mono pyro, or I should just say not mono pyro necessarily, but non-vape Hu Tao works better than you might expect. I think if you're someone who really, really likes Hu Tao and you're kind of bored of her vape playstyle, just try playing around with her in different ways. I guess I should explain the Martial Say Hunters thing on Hu Tao. So normally people would only use Martial Say Hunters on Hu Tao when paired with Farina, right? But the nature of Chevreuse is that Chevreuse causes a little bit of healing, and notably Chevreuse on a DPS build is not very much healing, but she heals every 2 seconds, right? For I believe 12 seconds, yep. And Hu Tao drains her own HP when you use her skill. So the end result is you do skill on Chevreuse, do Hu Tao's skill, and you see I get healed. That should be... Oh, we're already at max stacks. Apparently I didn't even notice we getting the first stack. And now you see we're at 94% crit rate, 278 crit damage. The thing is, though, you do kind of want C6 Chevreuse for this to make sense. So again, this is a hyper investment thing. But the fact that I can enable using Martial Sounders on Hu Tao on this account is a pretty significant deal. So as time has gone on, Hu Tao has only gotten stronger and stronger. Although, hey, maybe there's a unit that might be coming out in the future that might be even better in some ways than Hu Tao. But despite my praise for Hu Tao is a character that took a lot of investment to get value out of, and when we got Hu Tao, she was not the first time we 36 starred in the Abyss. The character that made the difference for 36 star in the Abyss was the character that released right after Hu Tao's rerun banner last year, and that was Yaoyao. Yup, it was Dendro. Dendro, in conjunction, especially with Yaoyao's synergy with Candace, it just really, really kind of broke open the doors for this account to be able to clear a lot more content. And once I got Yaoyao, I started 36 starring the Abyss with every single new enemy cycle. The only time I have not been able to clear the Abyss Inquisitive Baptist in the Abyss. This dude was 20 elemental shields because of the fact that Polearms Only is limited a lot more as far as, you know, elemental coverage for fast application to deal with shields. That dude with his 3 different elemental shields in a row kind of was a blockade. I think, though, the account now, you know, being it's been quite a long time since that dude was in Abyss, if he shows up in Abyss again, I am pretty confident I'll be able to beat him. So, you know, there's a revenge arc coming for the one enemy, the one Abyss cycle that stopped Polearms Only. I'm pretty sure we can deal with it now because we have more tools. But anyways, Yaoyao is really important because Dendro's strong, and on top of that, she is a really, really good healer. So she's just a really nice defensive unit in general. Her healing is quite frankly ridiculous, and she synergizes with Candace to be able to do Hydra application and Dendro application at the same time in AoE. Like the AoE strength of doing Yaoyao's Dendro application and Candace's Hydra application actually makes it so that a Hyperbloom team with Candace and Yaoyao performs better and more consistently in AoE situations than it does in single target, even though Hyperbloom is normally a single target focused team. So it's kind of unintuitive, but it's because of the fact that Yaoyao's Dendro application shines and Candace's Hydra application shines best in AoE situations. After Yaoyao was Shenhe, and I thought Shenhe was not going to be very useful, but as I mentioned before, the Melt team with Rosaria just actually is one of my favorite teams. So Shenhe really only has that one team basically, but hey, you know what? Shenhe's really useful for getting value out of one of the most fun teams I have on the account, so Shenhe was a good character to get. And then since then, we got C3 Raiden quite recently. I don't think we did anything between Shenhe's rerun banner last year and then last December, just a few months ago, we got C3 Raiden, and notably we got C6 Chevreuse. And Chevreuse is an insane game changer in conjunction with C6. She can just be a buffer for pyro and electro damage, even without doing her overload stuff. And, you know, I would basically describe her as the Kazuha / Bennett of this account, and that's a pretty big deal. On top of being a fun damage dealer herself when I'm doing a build like this, and I made videos on Chevreuse. She's ridiculous. If you've seen any of my Abyss clears and videos I've made on Polearms Only since getting her, she's really, really strong. Nothing has changed of my original statements and thoughts about her. I thought she was going to be good before her release, and she ended up being even better. And with new Pyro Polearms coming out, she should be gaining even more value. And I think that's pretty much it for the general wishing his... Oh, I forgot about Mika. Mika was on Shenhe's banner. I'm tempted to just leave him out of the video and pretend he doesn't exist. That's pretty much the story of characters, you know, acquiring all the Polearm characters in this account. So now I want to talk about Overworld stuff just a little bit. Honestly, overall, like the experience of Overworld on this account is not that different from a normal account, with a big ol' asterisk of, you know, being once you get all the elements, right? When you don't have all of the elements available to you, you know, you can't do things, notably, like, I think there's an electro, yeah, see there's an electro pillar in here. I was actually able to activate this electro pillar, I think, this specific one, I don't know why this came to my brain, but I was able to activate this specific electro pillar before getting an electro character, because there are electro slimes here that I was able to swirl electro around with Shao to be able to activate that pillar. But generally speaking, outside of that circumstance of being able to do shenanigans like swirling elements to activate pillars, there is not much in the game that really stops you from like completing general exploration. There is instances of, you know, like the animal balloon thingies that float in trees that you're supposed to use a bow character to hit to be able to like get a chest or whatever. But some people know this. There's this little gadget called the Wind Blast Harpastum, and you can equip this and you can throw little balls. And these are annoying as heck to use, but you can use these to trigger any balloons and pop them and complete stuff that way. Any dailies or whatever, like in Fontaine, that requires hitting balloons, you can use the Harpastum for that. And also nowadays we also have, you know, aiming characters like Chevreuse, and the aiming ability on Chevreuse there just lets you pop them the same way, although her cooldown is very long, right? So point being, once you got all the elements, it's not that hard. The only real issue I encountered past that was situations like in Sumeru. Alright, here we go. So this thing here, when these go up in the air, it can be a lot harder to trigger them. Okay, well this one is a terrible example, clearly. But basically when they go in the air, You can't do a charge attack on them with, you know, units that are stuck on the ground, go figure. And that means you have to be tricksy with like using Zhongli's pillar to angle it in certain ways to be able to hit some of these things that are in the air, or some of them are just impossible. Like if it was in the air up above Hu Tao's head here, that would be something you really need to use a bow character to use, and you cannot use stuff like that or past them to trigger them. There is legitimately some of these that are impossible on Polearms Only, and aiming mode on characters like Chevreus's ability doesn't work on them either. You have to do a charge attack on them, and yeah, that just makes them a bit awkward, is all it comes down to. Most of them, in my experience, can still be triggered, though. This one obviously was very easy because it was just on the ground. And I personally don't have much motivation to, you know, finish out exploration on this account that much, just because there's not really a need for me to get the additional resources. I mean, actually, I don't know. My resources are not that high for any upcoming Polearm 5 stars, so I don't know. Maybe I'll end up doing some exploration streams soon. Let me know if you want to see that in the comments, I guess. I think I already mentioned artifacts and the weird issue of like a ton of my artifacts just aren't being used at any given moment, but all in all, I'd say my artifacts just look like probably what most people's artifacts tend to trend towards on a statistical level after 2 years of farming. Emblem has by far been like one of the most universal valuable domains in the account, just because Xiangling is really good, Raiden's pretty good, C6 Candace uses Emblem most of the time too. 2-piece Emblem is good for energy recharge. Shimenawa's is obviously good because it's paired with Emblem, and then it was good for 4-piece on Hu Tao. Crimson I farmed a bunch of. 4-piece Crimson is actually not really that useful, to be completely honest. I only farmed this much Crimson for Chevreuse, and then I didn't even end up using 4-piece Crimson. I'm doing 2-piece on Chevreuse. So, yeah. Overall, artifact situation, kind of boring on the account. Nothing that much to talk about. Oh, 5-star weapons, I guess, real quick, because it's fun to talk about this. I never even recorded pulling for this. I got Staff of Scarlet Sands, and boy, am I glad I did, when Sina was first running. Not because I was actually going for Staff of Scarlet Sands, but because Fav Lance, good lord, is Fav Lance a pretty important weapon. Weapons are actually kind of one of the most interesting problems that happens when you're only using one weapon type of characters, right? Because I'm only using polearm characters, you need a lot of polearm weapons to equip them with. And early on, that's a pretty big issue. Nowadays, I have a lot of options, and I've gotten quite lucky with 5-star weapons. This weapon I got in trying to get more Fabs originally, right? I got this at 30 pity, and that was very lucky. I cannot believe I got that. And then also, this was on stream. I did a 10 pull for Engulfing Lightning after winning the 50-50 for Raiden, C0 Raiden, and blam, look at Engulfing Lightning that I now have. And it forever is stuck on Xiangling because it's Xiangling's signature weapon. I think the first Jade Spear was from Xiao's original banner because we got lucky on Xiao when we first, like, this account overall has gotten quite lucky for 5 stars, it was what I would say. And then Staff of Homa, I think, took 120 pulls or so to get, and then the second Staff of Homa, I think, took a similar amount of pulls. So Staff of Homa I've had to spend the most resources on. One of these Jade Spears is from Sander banner, I think, and then another one is from an off rate up. I think ingoing for the second copy of Staff of Homa. So overall, the weapon luck has obviously been very good. I got almost bow, I don't know, I think this was from, oh, I know, I was trying to get a second copy of Staff of Scarlet Sands because I use Raiden on Staff of Scarlet Sands a lot now, and I really would like a second copy of Staff of Scarlet Sands for Rosaria Melt, but sadly I did not get that. Instead, I got almost bow. Oh well. And I got Nuvilet's weapon in trying to go for a second copy of Staff of Homa. Getting 2 Staff of Homas was just a decision of, hey, we have a bunch of wishes at this time, and Staff of Homa is a good, useful stat stick to use on other characters. So as you can see, obviously I'm using on Chevreuse because look how good it looks on her. Quite lucky on this count overall. I've gotten a good amount of earlies. We've done a lot of wishes, but we've gotten a lot of earlies. I'd say this count has gotten luckier than average, but I don't have any actual stats for you. So the Abyss. I'll show you the Abyss history real quick. I think I mentioned before I have been trying to keep up a streak. So you can see I've kept a streak since, let's see, yep, the 2023-9 Abyss. And before that, I was keeping up, you know, clearing Abyss cycles, 36 starring them when there was a new enemy cycle, but I usually didn't bother spending the time even doing much in the account because, you know. And you can see the only Abyss cycle, I believe, was one of these ones. I don't know which exact one here. Whatever one with the Inquisitive Baptist, right? But then you can see 36 stars again before that. Yeah, the Inquisitive Baptist was really the only one that stopped this account. But we will have our revenge in the future if he ever shows up again. All in all, Abyss is the same as on normal account. Abyss is a situation of looking at the enemy mechanics and seeing what you have available to deal with the enemy mechanics more than anything. And oftentimes they structure it, doing a single target focus side and a AoE focus side, but also there's more dynamics than that because there's things like you have to think about the downtime in the phases of like the perpetual mechanical cube. Having teams that are flexible, like this team here seems like an unconventional team doing 2 DPSs that want to be on field, right? And normally if I've been using this in Abyss, I would actually use Toma instead of Xiangling. Having Raiden and Hu Tao actually works pretty well together in a team because for like the Weenut, I used this team against the Weenut in the previous cycle, and it has like alternating like phases of short windows where it's letting you deal damage to it. Having the ability to swap between doing Raiden damage and Hu Tao damage was able to allow me to easily, like it was not hard at all for me to deal with the Weenut when it was in the previous Abyss cycle. When the Weenut was originally in the Abyss, it was actually a total pain in the butt for the account. I think it took me like 12 hours to clear the Weenut for the first time. That was back when the account was much younger though. When the Weenut came back, we were able to destroy him without a problem. So overall, my point is like this account is an interesting problem of decision making of like, okay, being that I'm limited by what do I have, like 13 polearm characters right now, how do I configure competent teams that can deal with whatever situation? And oftentimes that means I have to use different teams for different chambers, by the way. So I believe what I did was I used Shenhe Melt, which was Rosaria, Zhongli, Xiangling, and this team I used to clear the first chamber, and it worked really well. And I believe I used the Hu Tao Chevreuse variation to deal with the second half for all 3 chambers. The only difference was in the second and third chamber, I actually used Sino instead of Raiden for a Chevreuse team. So I did something like this with Sino. And then on the first side, I switched to doing hybrid Raiden. Actually, I believe I used Rosaria instead of Zhongli there because of the shield mechanics on these enemies. I didn't want to have Zhongli's shield. So yeah, this is the team configuration I actually used to 36 star this Abyss cycle, and it wasn't very difficult. If I remember to, I'll link an unlisted video in the description of me clearing chambers 2 and 3. Chambers 1 was in a live stream. Chambers 2 and 3 were not that hard. It took me maybe 30 minutes to clear this Abyss. Like it wasn't first try. This was a harder Abyss cycle for the account, but it wasn't 10 hours like some Abysses have been in the past. And that's just an effect of Chevreuse and Raiden constellations now kind of just level out the amount of options I have for making teams deal competent damage, that it's just way easier to deal with different situations now. Again, it's a story of hyper investment. By being able to hyper invest as time has gone on to having more things, and then just being lucky that MiHoYo released a god tier character for the account in the form of Chevreuse. Yeah, I honestly don't think there's any content that could stop Polearms Only now. That might be a bit arrogant. We'll see if the Inquisitive Baptist comes back though, and if that stops me. I think we'll be fine though. I think something like C6 Yaoyao and her little bit of extra Dendra application may genuinely be the difference maker in conjunction with Raiden dealing more damage to be able to deal with Inquisitive Baptist, but we shall see. Ultimately, it's just an interesting case of, despite the fact that, I'm so limited in my character selection, I still am successful in the Abyss, right? Sometimes it's to a degree that if this was your account, I wouldn't say it was necessarily a very sane amount of time investment to be able to clear, but I was able to clear nonetheless. I was able to clear by just being a little bit better or hyper investing a little bit more. And I think it's an example of Genshin being pretty well designed, in my opinion, in offering you, the player, right, offering us a lot of freedom in how we want to do things, right? Like, Hu Tao might be unoptimal for certain Abyss cycles, but the game rewards you for hyper investing in Hu Tao by making Hu Tao, despite her being unoptimal in some Abyss cycles, more viable by nature of your hyper investment. And that's kind of the story of this account, is the more I have invested in things, both through wishing and artifacts and different builds available for dealing with different things, the more I've been able to deal with the situations the game can throw. Oh, I suppose here's a brief list through of the teams I have used quite a lot on Polearms Only over the last 2 years. This was a Candace vape team using Xiangling's pyro application to vape with Candace using her own self-infusion. This is mostly just a fun Overworld team I used for a long time, just because I enjoyed playing Candace. This is Physical Zhongli I mentioned before, and the one use that Mika has on the account. And this is a variation of the Hyperbloom team. So as always, Hyperbloom, the spice of Hyperbloom is the flex slot, and Rosaria is nice. When you're using a character with less Dendro application, you can actually cheat out extra Bloom Core generation, which means it's extra cores that Raiden can trigger, extra Hyperbloom damage. And Rosaria is really useful for that, on top of like the defensive utility for making enemies stay still. So yada yada. This team is really weird and interesting. This team is the hardest one. I felt like it almost was like RNG in its performance, but also wasn't RNG. I've used this team a ton, and not just with Raiden on a full Hyperbloom build, even though she was on a full Hyperbloom build on 4-piece Flowers of Paradise for a long time. But boy, this team shows a ridiculous amount of skill expression as far as deciding when I want to do things like using Candace's shield to block attacks. I've quite often been able to use Candace in really, really interesting ways in this team. Like, I don't know. I don't even know where to begin. Talking about the history of my use of this specific team variation, but basically Yaoyao plus, doing Candace, do bursts, and then Candace's ability to do Hydra application from normal attacks, from her infusion, plus, controlling the Hydra application being front-loaded a little bit by nature of switching, plus by nature of the defensive utility of her shield, and, like, timing parries. Like, it's a super satisfying team to, like, play a lot and slowly feel out how it can play better. And I still don't even think I play it that well sometimes because, if I haven't played the team in a while, my brain just, like... and I can't do it properly. But then as I play it a little bit, I get the feel for it again, and then I can clear content relatively reliably with it. And I don't know, it's really interesting. It's not like, I'm certainly not going to claim it's the strongest variation of a Hyperbloom team or anything. I want to be clear. It's just that Yaoyao and Candace have surprisingly strong synergy. I think it's something that people don't, generally speaking, recognize because we have so many stronger options for ridiculous Hydra units. Like so many people disparage Candace's kit, but like that's because the closest comparison to Candace is Xingqiu. Like, you can make a very strong argument Xingqiu's the best character in the freaking game, and people are like, Candace is not Xingqiu. Like, good lord. Like, yeah, Candace is not Xingqiu, but also she genuinely has some upsides over Xingqiu. And anywho's, I'm rambling. I like Candace. I'm biased. Point is, this team is really, really interesting and is an example of a team that can clear much of the hard endgame combat in the game, even if it seems like, oh, wow, you're using non-optimal characters. They clearly wouldn't be able to be successful. Like, no, they can. And this has been one of the core teams that has enabled this account to be able to 36-star, and that's pretty cool. And it's all thanks to Candace. And yeah, and Raiden. And Rosaria helped. Because go figure, it's a team-based game. This is a mono Pyro Hu Tao variation using Shao to buff Xiangling and Hu Tao's damage. That has been very, very good. It's Xiangling strength in AoE, and then Hu Tao strength in single target has made this team very, very good, especially for any Abyss cycle that just is, need strong single target damage against something, and blam, there you go. This is just a Dendro team variation using Toma a little bit more. This is the Rosaria Shenhe melt variation that I talked about. Xiangling is basically required for this team to apply Pyro to enable Rosaria to pretty consistently melt. Although one fun thing that happens is even if things get messed up and Rosaria doesn't melt, well, guess who melts instead? It's Xiangling. And boy, when my Xiangling build hits a melt, even without Bennett, it hits for a lot of damage. Yeah, Xiangling's a strong character, and this is the main team that Shenhe is useful in. The main downside of this team is I can't really use Hu Tao in the team. That's not Hu Tao. Because both Rosaria and Shenhe really, really, really want to use multiple skills per rotation. And if you can't, this team just doesn't feel very good. So Hu Tao does not really function as the Pyro applier, and Toma does not apply enough Pyro. Shivers applies a bunch of Pyro, but it's very front-loaded. So it's really only Xiangling that works here. But I think there's a character coming out that might actually work as an on-fielder here. We'll see. And that could actually be a pretty big deal because I really love playing this team, but it eats Xiangling, and sometimes Xiangling is very valuable for other teams. So, and then there's Chevreuse variations. This is the main one I've been using in Overworld. Sometimes Raiden is necessary to be, used in these team variations, and that means Raiden's not available for this team, and that means Saito's the other Electro, right? So this is the team slot just for the general archetype of Chevreuse overload teams, although Chevreuse can still be useful with her C6 as just a buffer for Hu Tao, regardless of being an overload team. This team is a secret that it looks exactly the same as this team, but it's actually played very differently, and I'm not going to talk about it because it'll be in a future video. I think that's basically all I got for my rambles about this account. That's a general tour of the whole account. It's been very successful. Unlike other series, I do not, in no world would I consider this account a mistake. This is, personally, has made me enjoy playing Genshin a whole lot more. Would I have actually, gone as hard into it as I have if I, hadn't been making content on it? Almost assuredly not. But at the same time, even as I have deprioritized making content in this account in favor of doing other ideas or doing other series, I've still consistently tried to log into Polearms Only and progress the account, which I think is proof of my enjoyment of it. I don't hate playing on this account. Even if I've been frustrated at times trying to problem solve things, it's very satisfying when I'm able to solve the problems, right? And in many ways it makes it more engaging. Ultimately, I wouldn't recommend creating a second Genshin account or anything because this game is such a time sink for one account. I feel like it's probably better just to play other video games rather than make a second Genshin account. But hey, if that's what you want to do, don't let me stop you. If you don't enjoy, mechanical optimization for games, though, I don't think it's something that would be valuable to you long term, but many players would still get value early game and trying to problem solve with exploration and et cetera, et cetera. For me, I have gotten long-term value, and I think I'll continue getting value as long as MiHoYo keeps on releasing, new Pyro Polearms, because that's apparently the only thing we ever get anymore. Subscribe, I guess, if you want to see more Polearms Only content. I do have a number of videos planned for this account still, on top of whatever videos that come off of new characters releasing. So yeah, I'm not ending this series or anything. I'm going to continue on. The pace of improvement for this account is, of course, much slower now because the account is already at such a high investment level that there's not much to really get that's better. For example, it's probably going to be pretty hard to get a better Hydro Goblet than this one. At the very least, if they release new Dendro characters, new Hydro characters, those could be pretty big game changers for the account for increasing even more team options than I already have. And as time goes on, options can only improve, and we'll see what happens. Oh, actually, wait. But check out Volti if you want to see someone else doing a Polearm series, because I think they just started a Polearm Only series. And if you want to see the early game experience, probably from someone who makes better videos than I do.